The self-propelled barge T-36 was a Soviet barge of the Project 306 type. The barge is known for drifting 49 days across the North Pacific Ocean in 1960 after being disabled, with all sailors on board surviving the journey by rationing 3 days' supply of food. In December 1959, all 6 self-propelled barges assigned to the garrison on Iturup Island were beached to endure the winter storms and undergo scheduled repairs. The 10-day emergency rations usually stored on board were removed and sent to the depot. Shortly before January 17, 1960, the command was informed of a delayed arrival of the final supply ship, prompting the return of 2 of the 6 barges to the water. These barges received 1.5 tons of diesel fuel and, on January 15th, a 3-day supply of water and food. Barges T-36 and T-97 were then moored to a floating barrel approximately 500 feet offshore. Shortly after midnight on January 17, 1960, a severe storm with hurricane-force winds struck the barges. The tackle was torn apart, and the crew, 21-year-old Tatar Junior Sergeant Askat Zyganshin, 2 Ukrainians, Private Philip Poplavsky and Private Anatoly Kryuchkovsky, both 20, and a Russian, 22-year-old Private Ivan Fedotov, started the barge's engines to avoid the rocks. However, weighing anchor away from the shore was impossible due to poor visibility and strong winds. After 40 to 50 minutes, the wind pushed the barge too close to the shore again, so the engines were restarted to navigate further away. This process repeated several times, with the sailors battling the storm for over 10 hours. Eventually, the eye of the storm passed over the island and the wind reversed direction, now pushing the barge away from the shore. The crew decided to run the barge aground, but when they attempted to do so, around 10 p.m., the engines ran out of fuel and stopped. The wind dragged the barge out of the lagoon and into the open ocean. The garrison command was aware of the crew's struggle with the hurricane, but then radio communication ceased as the barge's transmitter was rendered inoperable by the storm. Once the storm subsided, a search and rescue team of 15 soldiers was deployed to scour the seashore. They discovered wreckage, including a lifebuoy and remnants of the wooden coal storage box, both marked with the barge's number. This confirmed the suspicion that the barge had sunk during the hurricane, resulting in the loss of its crew. After the search efforts concluded, formal missing person notifications were sent to the families of the crew. Zyganshin recorded the details into the vessel's deck log. From a recent newspaper found aboard, the crew learned that the area of the ocean the vessel was drifting towards, according to their personal estimate, which was later found to be incorrect, was being officially dedicated for ballistic missile testing for the period between January 15th and February 15th. With that in mind, Zyganshin estimated that the chances of their rescue in the near future were extremely slim, and decided to strictly ration the available food and water. On the second day of their drift, the crew assessed their situation. Their available supplies included approximately 2 buckets of potatoes, a loaf of bread, 3 pounds of lard, a can and a half of canned meat, some fresh water in the tea kettle, a couple of pounds of millet and dried peas, 1 carton of tea, 1 carton of coffee, and about 50 matches. The buckets of potatoes stored in the engine room had been overturned by the storm, scattering the potatoes across the floor and soaking them in diesel fuel. They also sourced a significant amount of fresh water, 120 liters, 32 U.S. gallons, from the engine's cooling system, which was red with rust and tasted like metal. To keep warm, the soldiers kept a fire going in the potbelly stove, using whatever combustible materials they could find, including wooden crates, lifesavers, rags, paper scraps, old newspapers, and wooden planks from 2 of their beds. When these readily available materials ran out, the crew began burning the tires that served as the barge's fenders, shaving pieces of rubber off them with a dull kitchen knife. Each tire lasted about a week. After depleting their food supplies, the crew eventually resorted to eating their leather belts, wristlets, leather parts of their garment, and leather parts of their boots in desperate attempts to stave off hunger. Approximately 40 days into their journey, the men saw a passing ship, but their attempts to attract its attention were unsuccessful. In the following days, 2 more ships passed without noticing them. Finally, around 3 p.m., local time on March 7th, After drifting for 49 days, they were spotted by two Grumman S-2 launched by the USS Kearsarge in stormy waters 1,200 miles off Wake Island, leading to their rescue. According to Fedotov's recollections, two airplanes circled the barge and then flew away, and after a while, two helicopters appeared. According to the aircraft carrier's captain, the people spotted on the barge were standing, leaning against the deckhouse. The rescued men were offered broth, white bread, and coffee. The Americans were amazed that the soldiers, despite their condition, retained their human dignity and self-discipline. When given food, they didn't rush at it but calmly passed the plate to their comrades. All four are slowly, understanding that consuming a larger portion could be fatal, as often happened to those who had endured prolonged starvation. Ziganshin mentioned that he learned this lesson during his childhood, during the war. After eating, the rescued men were taken to the shower, where Ziganshin lost consciousness and later woke up in a bunk in the infirmary. According to the observations of the aircraft carrier's chief physician, Frederick Beckwith, the soldiers each lost between 30 to 35 pounds. On March 13th, all four were transferred from the carrier's infirmary to two cabins. Eating 5 times a day, they each gained about 7 pounds within a week. The first publication in the USSR about the incident appeared on March 12, 1960, in the newspaper Izvestia, which reported, "On March 6th, an American plane on patrol duty for an aircraft carrier in the Pacific Ocean discovered a light barge on the ocean's surface. On it were 4 Soviet men, a sergeant, and 3 ordinary soldiers. They last saw land on January 18th. The publication was accompanied by a map marking the discovery location, reprinted from the New York Herald Tribune. On March 15th, the aircraft carrier arrived in San Francisco. The rescued soldiers were taken ashore by 2 helicopters, where they were met by a representative of the Soviet embassy in the USA. On March 17th, Soviet newspapers' front pages featured Defense Minister Malinovsky expressing gratitude to the commander and crew of the aircraft carrier Kearsarge, while Chairman of the Supreme Soviet of the USSR Nikita Khrushchev thanked San Francisco Mayor George Christopher and U.S. President Dwight Eisenhower. On March 18th, the soldiers were flown to New York, where they stayed for several days at the Killenworth Mansion in Glen Cove, used for housing the Soviet delegation to the UN. Before heading home, each of the 4 men received $100 from the embassy, which they spent during a city tour. The soldiers departed for Europe on the transatlantic liner Queen Mary on March 23rd. After arriving in the French port of Cherbourg on March 28th, they traveled to Paris. On March 29th, the drift participants, in military uniform, flew to Moscow on a Tu-104 aircraft, where they received a celebratory welcome.